In the end, the calling card of Storm Eunice was its devastating winds. With record speeds of up to 122 miles per hour.
So as you just saw, we had a bit of a storm, one after the other, during the month of February. And coming straight to the point of this video, yes, it did damage a whole lot of fences around the country, including mine. Now, not that my fence was in any great condition before all of this. Like here, the bottom of all the posts were completely rotten. And even few of the posts were off the concrete spur. Most of the Arris rails suffered from some degree of rot damage. The heavy winds during the storm damaged a whole lot of fences around the country. So the question now is, should I DIY it or get in a professional? As prices of everything has gone up, getting in a professional is getting pretty expensive. You probably guessed by this video that I'm probably going to DIY it. I will discuss the cost further down the video, and that's going to be an eye-opener, and you can see if we actually saved any money at all. We will also cover some questionable work carried out by professional tradesmen as well. So I took detailed measurements of the existing fence, and this includes the height of the post, the width between the posts, and with these two information you can work out the materials that you need to get. In my specific case, I had a section of 3 panels, followed by a brick wall, and then a further 3 panels. Now the plan is to install new wooden posts. These will be bolted in at the bottom of this concrete spur. I'm doing it this way because I already have a concrete spur installed by the previous owners. So it makes sense to do a like-for-like replacement. However, for most people, if you do not have a concrete spur, the correct way is to dig 1/3 into the ground and then put your posts in it and then use postcrete to hold it up. If you don't like the idea of wooden posts, then you can use concrete posts. In fact, professional fencers always uses concrete posts, and that's because they definitely outlast wooden posts. The only issue is that it's a heavy material and you may need 2 people to handle this. Now, after the posts have been fixed, next is to install Arris rails between the posts. 3 is a magic number in between the posts, and the posts are 1.8 meters tall and the span between the posts are around 2.25 meters. So the Arris rails are cut to the same dimensions as that. Now Arris rails are fixed onto the posts using Arris brackets, like these. These are actually used for fence repairs, but don't let that worry you. It's actually a best option to install Arris rails, as your alternatives are cutting out mortises on your posts and then sliding in the tenant edge of your Arris rail into it. Or another option is to drive in screws at an angle, just like pocket screws. But personally, I'm not a big fan of that, as you're exposing tiny pockets on the rails where rainwater will naturally collect. Next is fitting the gravel boards. Just like with the Arris rail, the easiest option is to use gravel brackets, like these. The beauty of this is that when the gravel board eventually starts to rot, you can easily replace the boards. The next super important thing is selecting your actual fence panel. Now, there are different variations of fence panels that you can get, but for simplicity's sake and for most of the users, there are just 3 types of panels to consider: lap panel, closed board fence panels, and featheredge fence panels. Each have their own advantages and disadvantages. I'm going for a featheredge board as the width between my fence posts are all over the place. As I mentioned earlier, like 5 out of 6 of the panels are over 1.8 meters wide, and 99% of the time 1.8 meters is the maximum size of a ready-made lap panel or a closed board panel that you can buy from the big store. So featheredge panel, that's not a bad thing, and in my humble opinion they actually look pretty good and it's very easy to install. However, the disadvantage is that it costs way more than the other 2. Now, on the topic of featheredge panels, they generally come in 3 widths: 100mm, 125mm and 150mm. In all 3 cases, you have to overlap them by around 25mm. I choose the 125mm width ones as it makes calculation pretty easy. That is 100mm exposed and 25mm of overlap. It also helped that 125mm ones were actually the cheapest at that time. The panels are then nailed onto the Arris rails from outside. I'll be showing it later down in the video, but just as a spoiler alert, I successfully used my Aldi nail gun shooting in galvanized staples just for that. One additional thing about the post that I forgot to mention earlier is the bottom of the post. I will be using these metal standoffs at the base. Now these are used for carports and pergolas and things like that, but I'm going to use it for the fence post, as this will keep the bottom of the post away from standing rainwater, and that should increase the lifespan of the post tremendously. Now to finish off the topic, I'll be using these metal post caps. You have the option for wooden post caps as well, but frankly there's nothing to beat a metal post caps in terms of durability. And the price difference is so minimal that it's a no-brainer. And that's it, that basically covers all the hardware and the steps involved. I will leave links down below for these hardwares and the tools used, but most of them are UK specific, but you can Google it and find an alternate product in your region or even on a different website. Anyways, now let's get to the actual work. So far you saw me cutting all the posts, the gravel boards, the Arris rails to size. And then each part received 2 coats of paint straight away. In my case, the outside part of the fence facing the road is going to be brown and the inside parts are going to be painted grey. Okay, so now this bitumen paint will be used at the bottom of the post. Each section will get 2 coats of the paint. The posts will sit on these galvanized post-base standoff to minimize the rainwater contact. Now this side of the post is facing the road and that to the house, and the fence and rails are on the side. Now the gravel board will be attached to the side with galvanized screws, and all the galvanized parts will get 3 coats of this brown spray paint. Since there are 150 individual feather boards to paint, I ditched the brush and the rollers and switched to my sprayer. This made the job way easier. In terms of time spent, I actually spent 2 days painting these panels with 2 coats on each side. And that's because I have that extra self-inflicted complication of painting brown on the outside and grey on the inside. Future Suj here. I just realized that viewers might not follow what I'm trying to do here, so let me just try and explain my thought process a bit more. This is a cross-section of a 2x2 template. The recess at the top side is 25mm deep. I got arrow marks on the top that indicates the position of the template with respect to the Arris rail. Next, I'll take the bracket and slide it over the Arris rail, and that's basically it. That'll give you the exact screw positions of the bracket. Now the fence panels will be fixed onto the Arris rail in this way. The depth of this section should max out at 22mm, which is why I choose a 25mm as a depth of the template. Now let's quickly dive in on the way how the fence panels are fixed. As you know by now, Featheredge panel has got a thick side and a thin side. You could start by fixing the boards by driving in the nails on the thick side like this. But to fix the next set of Featheredge boards, I created a quick jig. So I marked up 10 cm on the workbench and set my bevel gauge to this distance. And that's basically your jig, there's no need for anything fancier. As for spacing of the nails, I marked an indication on my left thumb at roughly 25mm. Obviously, make sure you move your thumb away before you fire the nail gun. To recap, on a 125mm board, you're allowing 100mm to be exposed and 25mm as an overlap. And now on a close-up, you can see the direction of the nails that has gone through one of the boards. You have to make sure that when you nail, it only goes through one board at a time. And that's to allow for seasonal expansion and contraction of the wood. If you do drive your nails through two of the boards, there are chances of the wood splitting and cracking. Now talking about nails, I actually use 40mm galvanized staples and not nails. I reckon a staple will significantly have more holding power than a smooth galvanized nail. Now if you don't have a nail gun, you could also use the good old-fashioned galvanized nails. Now this is actually my backup plan, which fortunately I didn't have to use. So let's start the installation from right and then work our way onwards towards the left. Now look at the state of the bottom of these posts, completely rotten out. These punch marks are for the location of the coach screws. To fix the post onto the concrete spur, I'm planning to use two coach screws at the top and the bottom, and the middle one will get a coach bolt. To recap, I used 40mm coach screws to hold the Arris bracket to the post and 25mm coach screws to hold the Arris onto the Arris bracket. Now that's the view from the outside. The 3 parallel Arris rails will now provide a solid base to nail in the fencing boards. Now every board gets one staple each, fixing it on the Arris rail. Every set of boards have a spacing of 10 cm. You can either measure it out approximately, or if the spacing allows for it, then use the bevel gauge technique that I mentioned earlier. Now regarding spacing, it doesn't really need to be exactly with a gap of 10 cm either. The human eye apparently will not detect slight variations in width. And for that very reason, when you reach closer to the end of the adjacent post, you would need to change the overlap width to cover the fence panel structure fully. Regarding panel directions, now there are no fixed rules for that either. You could start from either the left or from the right side of your property boundary. But factors that could influence the panel orientation is to look for the predominant wind direction, or the way how the ground slopes up or down, or just see how your old fence panel or your neighbor's panels were oriented and just follow that same pattern. Or simply just toss a coin. And with that, the first panel is done. Now this took around 3 hours to install with filming and all that, but subsequent ones took only around an hour each. As with most DIY projects, as you know, with each panel that you install, your technique will improve as well, and even your efficiency. And by the time you're completely done with it, you'll be acing it. Now let's talk about potential issues that you could face. And this one is kind of unique and really out there. Remember earlier in the video I talked about using professionals for fencing? Well, guess what? This is one of the boundary concrete posts that was installed on a neighboring property. And the professional fencers have conveniently screwed the concrete post onto my rotten wooden post. Now I think the reason why they did this is because of the concrete spur on my side of the property and they didn't want to disturb it. But as you can see, this post wasn't even concreted into the ground. And from this angle, you can actually see how wobbly the fence has become once I detach my old wooden post from the concrete spur. Since access was limited to unscrew it, I used a reciprocating saw and cut through my fence post and removed it. I discussed this with my neighbor, and just like me, they were also surprised that the fencers did this kind of a job. Now getting the fences back and to replace the post and to concrete that in is all going to take a lot of time. So I recommended to bolt it back again after I had finished fitting my new post. I used the same 280mm coach bolts to hold the neighbor's post onto my wooden post securely. And that's one problem solved. Now I used 3 coach bolts to hold my post down onto the concrete spur, and that's to take in the extra load. I also spray painted all the washers and the bolts to blend in neatly with the fence boards. And that's the last panel in. And with the whole job completed, let's talk about costs. Now, professional fencing company charges around 130 to 200 pounds a meter. I have a 15 meter span, so that roughly translates to a figure of between 1,900 to 3,000 pounds. This figure will obviously vary based on your region and the materials used. Now for DIY, I spent a grand total of 976 pounds for materials alone. This covers everything that you saw in the video: the posts, the Arris rails, the gravel boards, all the hardware, and even the paint and the spray paint. Obviously, labor was free as it's just me working on the weekend, and if you include the cost of the Aldi nailer, it comes to a grand total of £1,100. So that's still a big saving of around 900 to around 2,000 pounds. And hey, thanks for the 10,000 subscribers. You guys are the best. All I could ask from you in return is to give this video a like, subscribe to the channel for more interesting DIY videos, and thanks for watching, and catch you all in the next one. Thanks.